Did our Messiah partake of a Passover, or the Last Supper, or the New Covenant meal? Continue of second half of difference number 1, date or time. When was the meal eaten? Was it on the Passover day? It was the Lord's Last Supper or meal with the 12 apostles until he returns. As said, they probably ate many evening meals together in many upper rooms on a regular basis. After the meal was eaten, the New Covenant began. Judas Iscariot was not there for the New Covenant. The Messiah was dying in the flesh, thus fulfilling prophecies foretold during the First Covenant equals the name. The one who was, the one who spoke, had his feet washed, and ate a meal with prophets like Abraham. Genesis 18:1-4. Genesis 18:1. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent in the heat of the day. Verse 2. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground. Verse 3. And said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Verse 4. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. In verse 1, the use of the word Lord, capital letters, is the same word or name used in Genesis 2:4 and given to Moses in Exodus 3:15, in Genesis 18, verse 13, 17, 20, 26, and 33. They show that the Lord was one of the 3 men who visited there and was present for the whole recorded event. In verse 3, some translators use the word Lord lowercase. Due to this and church doctrines, some believe that Abraham was speaking in verse 3 to only angels, or the others who came with the Lord. It is obvious by reading the whole account to the last verse, number 33, that, as stated, the Lord, capital letters, was present during the whole event. Abraham was merely addressing his authoritative position, as you will notice below in the detailed information. And he specifically said, If now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass away. So Abraham did not want the Lord to leave without spending time with him and having a meal. Below are translations that use a name instead of inserting Lord. That was not the first time that the Lord, capital letters, appeared to Abraham, as he recognized him from a distance. Genesis 18:3, and said, My Lord, H 136, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away. H 136 is Adonai. It's an emphatic form of H 113, the Lord, used as a proper name of God only, my Lord. New World Translation, Genesis 18:3. Then he said, Jehovah, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant. Verse 4. Let a little water be taken, please, and you must have your feet washed. Then he reclined under the tree. A point here is that Jehovah is not the Father's name. No man can see God. The Scriptures, 1998, Genesis 18:3, and said, Hebrew, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. Word of Yahweh, Genesis 18:3, and said, My Yahweh. The Holy Bible from ancient Eastern text, Aramaic of the Peshitta. Genesis 18:3, and said, O Lord, capital letters, if now I have found mercy in thy sight, do not pass away from thy servant. King James 18:13, and the Lord said unto Abraham. King James 18:17, and the Lord, capital again, said. King James 18:20, and the Lord said. King James 18:26, and the Lord said. King James 18:33, And the Lord, capital letters again, went his way. So these all have to do with Abraham, and he was speaking to the Lord, which is translated into Jehovah, which is not the Father. The Lord's meal covenant included a promise that he would come back to bring an end not just to Roman rule, but to bring an end to all satanic and man-made kingdoms and establish a kingdom with an unknown name till the last day. That will last forever with 100% reality and communication with the Father, the Aleph, the Eloah, God. This covenant will include all who did not commit the unforgivable sin. If they understand the meaning of the new covenant and what the bread and cup stood for, then they know that it would be shown by the way they lived. John tells us what that is. John 13:34. A new commandment I give you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. As this paragraph said in the beginning, the following scriptures mention a few things. The Messiah told the apostles to go and make sure that a place was being prepared for the Passover, the 15th. And they did exactly as he told them. Then, as the evening of Abib 13 ended, and after sunset the 14th began, the Messiah ate a meal, his last supper with them. Then he instituted the new covenant. He died before the sunset on Abib 14, and the 15th Passover began. Matthew 26:20. Now when the evening was come, he sat down with the 12. Mark 14:17. And in the evening he cometh with the 12. Luke 22:14. And when the hour was come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. John 13:1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them until the end. John 13:2. And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. John 6:70. Jesus answered them, Have not I chosen you 12? And one of you is a devil. John 6:71. He spake of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for he it was that should betray him, being one of the 12. John 13:2. Below includes what is referred to as Strong's Concordance numbers. They are in green. The note below is the explanation of what those numbers mean. John 13:2. And supper, G1173, being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. G1173 is Greek. It is from the same as G1160, which means dinner. That is the chief meal, usually in the evening, a feast or a supper. Note, simply said, they were told to make ready the Passover, which occurred after sunset the 14th. However, they were at an G1173 evening meal. It was our Lord's final supper or last supper. He was dead before the Passover, the 15th, began. Further down the article, you will see that the Bible, through Paul, supports this clearly. In the following scriptures, you'll notice the words in blue. They are the words that the translator chose to use when translating the Hebrew or Greek words. When you look up the original words in green, they always have many choices that describe what the word may mean to choose from. Usually, depending upon the doctrines or beliefs of the translator, they would choose the word that they feel best conveys what they believe the information is trying to convey based upon their doctrines. And usually, when they insert a word in their attempt to convey what they believe the information says, they will add a word to convey the thought. In the example below, notice the words we may eat, it. Notice the we and it are added by the translators to convey the thought that best conveys what they believed based upon their doctrines. And at Luke 22:8, we see a similar example. The students of inserted me, I inserted may eat. Notice the of and I are added to the verse. The thought that I may eat is accepted by many translators due to church doctrines that believe the meal was on the Passover. These additions seem to imply that the Messiah would also be eating the Passover. Perhaps the details of the information about his death and the fact that he would be dead before the Passover meal did not need to be conveyed to the house manager. Also, there was no need to get into a long discussion with the apostles until they were at the meal. Remember, the apostles did not know that one of them would betray him. They all questioned if it was them. At that moment, they still did not realize that he was going to die before the sunset that day, Abib 14. Remember, the Last Supper was eaten, then Judas left, then the new covenant was made, then he was arrested before the sun rose. By this time, the sunrise, or halfway through Abib or Nisan 14. There was no question in the remaining 11 apostles' minds that he was in great trouble, and by now they may have realized he was going to die just like the sacrificial lamb was about to die in preparation for the Passover on Abib or Nisan 15. Accurate New Translation, Luke 22:8. And he sends Peter and John, saying, Go prepare for us the Pesha, that we may eat it. Accurate New Translation, Luke 22:11. And you will say to the house manager of the house says to you, the teacher, where is the guest room where the Pesha, where the students of me I may eat? Accurate New Translation, Mark 14:14. And where if he may enter, say to the house manager, for the teacher says, where is the guest room of me, where the Pesha with the students of me I may eat. G5315. G5315 is Greek. It's a primary verb used as an alternative of G2068 in certain tenses. To eat literally or figuratively, eat or meet. Greek New Translation Interlinear. And he sent Peter and John, saying, having gone, prepare for us to Passover, that we may eat it. The following statements to Peter about the cock crowing show that it was early morning after the meal and the new covenant was made. It was not the day of the Passover, which began after he died. Matthew 26:75. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, Before the cock crows, thou shalt deny me thrice. Mark 14:68. But he denied, saying, I know not, neither understand I what thou sayest. And he went out into the porch, and the cock crew. Luke 22:60. And Peter said, Man, I know not what thou sayest. And immediately, while he yet spake, the cock crew. John 18:28. Peter then denied again, and immediately the cock crew. The following scriptures show that the Jewish religious leaders were not observing the Passover day when they stirred up the crowds to have the Messiah executed. It was early morning Abib 14, or around the time the sun rises. Due to the Jewish laws, they could not enter into the judgment hall, or they would become defiled and could not eat the Passover on Abib 15. John 18:28. Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they may eat the Passover. Matthew 27:1. When the morning was come, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. Mark 15:1. And straightway in the morning the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and bound Jesus, and carried him away, and delivered him to Pilate. Luke 22:66. And as soon as it was day, the elders of the people and the chief priests and the scribes came together, and led him into their council, saying, John 18:28. Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. John 19:14. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. So we can see in all these verses that he was alive before the Passover. He was being tried. The priests would not go into the judgment hall, and the Passover had not occurred because they wanted to partake of the Passover. But he would die before then. In the next scriptures, we see that it was customary to release a prisoner at the Passover feast. The process of choosing who was to be released occurred on Abib or Nisan 14, before the Passover. The 15th began. The Messiah was among the prisoners, and as we know, the Messiah was not chosen to be released. He was tortured and finally executed before the sunset on the 14th. Matthew 27:15. Now at that feast the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner whom they would. Matthew 27:16. And they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Mark 15:6. Now at that feast he released unto them one prisoner, whomsoever they desired. Luke 23:17. For of necessity he must release one of them at the feast. The following scriptures bring out information about the time of the crucifixion and the time that he died. There are many different viewpoints as to the exact moment. However, the point is that he died before the Passover began, just as the lamb had been sacrificed before the sunset, and then Passover began. Mark 15:25. And it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. John 19:18. Where they crucified him, and 2 other with him on either side, one and Jesus in the midst. Matthew 27:46. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Mark 15:33. And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Mark 15:34. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is, being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Luke 23:44. And it was about the 6th hour, a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. Luke 23:45. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. Luke 23:46. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. In the following scriptures, we will learn that before the sun set on Abib or Nisan 14, that is Thursday, the Messiah was to be taken down. Thursday, the 14th, was the day of preparation. Friday, the 15th, was the Passover, also considered a high holy Sabbath. And Saturday, the 16th, was a weekend Sabbath. He was taken down and wrapped in linen. It was the preparation day, and the high holy day, or Nisan 15, Passover, was about to begin. They began to prepare spices and ointments for his body, but due to the 14th sun setting and the 15th Passover beginning, they had to wait till Abib or Nisan 16th ended to finish the burial steps. This would be the beginning of Abib 17. The 17th was the beginning of the work week. Early on the 17th, just as the sun began to rise, Mary went to the tomb. Question: if your loved one was in the same situation and you could not be with them, how soon would you go to your loved one's tomb to finish their burial preparation? ASAP, as soon as possible. Matthew 28:1. In the end, G3796 of the Sabbath, G4521, as it began to dawn, G2020. Now, G2020 in Greek is a form of G2017. It means to begin to glow light, to begin to dawn. Arrival on the 17th, the first day after the Sabbath, the first day of the week or Sunday, when they proceeded to go to his grave to finish the burial process, they found he was raised from the dead. The Passover and the Lord's meal and his resurrection do not always occur on the same Thursday to Sunday, called Easter. The word Sabbath means a day of rest from the daily pursuits and mental concerns of making a living. Wikipedia definition: Sabbath is a day set aside for rest and worship. According to Exodus 20, verse 8, the Sabbath is commanded by God to be kept as a holy day of rest, as God rested from creation. Today, it is observed by Jews from Friday evening to Saturday evening, and by most Christians on Sunday, and Muslims do theirs on Friday. And holy days were often referred to as Sabbaths because they were a day of rest. This is why there are 2 Sabbaths that year. 1, a Passover Sabbath, followed by 2, an end of a week Sabbath, a day when no work was to be performed. Matthew 27:58. He went to Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. Verse 59. And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. Verse 60. And laid it in his own new tomb, which had been hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed. Mark 15:46. And he brought fine linen, and took him down, and wrapped him in the linen, and laid him in a sepulchre which was hewn out of rock, and rolled a stone unto the door of the sepulchre. Verse 47. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jose, beheld where he was laid. Luke 23:53. And he took it down and wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, wherein never man before was laid. Verse 54. And that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. You see, it was the day of preparation. The Sabbath, which was the Passover, was not here. Verse 55. And the woman also, which came with him from Galilee, followed after, and beheld the sepulchre, and how his body was laid. Verse 56. And they returned, and prepared spices and ointments, and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. John 19:31. The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation that the bodies should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath day was a high day, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken, and that they might be taken away. Verse 33. But when they came to Jesus, and saw that he was dead already, they brake not his legs. Verse 42. There laid they Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. Matthew 28:1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. Luke 24:1. And upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came unto the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. Please note that the day following the day of preparation is mentioned here. The day after the day of preparation would be the Passover. So you can gather from this that the Jewish leaders were so insistent upon their destroying the Messiah's claims of being the Messiah that they went during a high holy day, or the Passover, to Pilate in an attempt to discredit the Messiah. Matthew 27:62. Now the next day that followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees came together unto Pilate. We will now continue with difference number 2, the details of the meal with regard to the New Covenant. Extra point to consider. Since the Passover was a covenant with the Hebrews or Jews, and they do not believe that their Savior has come yet, then during the Passover as set up when they were released from Egypt is as far as they can go. If you believe that the Word became flesh and died, then you are not doing the Passover when you take the symbolic wine and bread. You are following what he said to do in remembrance of his sacrifice. Luke 22:19. And he took bread and gave thanks and brake it and gave unto them, saying, This is my body which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. If you observe the date of Nisan 15th, then you are off by one day. He instituted the new covenant as Nisan 14 began. Though it was dark out, it was the beginning of a new day. That day continued till he died, and the sun set. Then the Jews, including the apostles and Mary and the priests, etc., observed the Passover. We will now explain difference number 2, the bread and wine. See Passover or New Covenant 2017, Part 5. Thank you from a humble penman.